This broadcast of the House first aired earlier today. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this is the House. A new political season is revving up, and Donald Trump's tariffs are still casting a large shadow.
What's going on is not a transition. It's a rupture, and its effect will be profound.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is putting billions of dollars into a new Buy Canada strategy. But is it an acknowledgement that tariffs are here to stay? This week on the House, Industry Minister Mélanie Joly on that and what signal it sends that her government is pausing another climate policy, this time on electric vehicles. Also, schools dealing with the fallout from fewer international students, calls to end the temporary foreign worker program. The conversation around immigration is heating up again. But just how much responsibility do immigration levels bear for some of the problems facing Canadians? And does Canada need its own civil defense force? Last week, we heard about efforts by Finland and Sweden to teach citizens to better protect themselves. Today, Canadians talk about how people here could be better prepared for worst-case scenarios. But first, the government buys in big to buying Canadian. The House is now in session.
The mission that is guiding Canada's new government, the North Star that we follow, is building lasting economic strength for Canadian workers and their families. With economic uncertainty making it challenging for the private sector to invest, government must act. As Minister Joly said, government is meeting this moment with the most comprehensive suite of trade-resilient measures in Canadian history.
The federal government has announced a major new effort aimed at helping Canadian workers and businesses in the face of Donald Trump's tariffs. From retraining workers in hard-hit sectors to a $5 billion strategic response fund for affected companies to a new Buy Canadian policy to ensure the government buys from Canadian suppliers. What does it tell us about where this trade war is going? Mélanie Joly is the federal industry minister. We spoke Friday afternoon. Hello, Minister.
Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm well. I want to ask you, is introducing all of these supports a sign that there is a long road ahead, that in fact a deal on tariffs with the U.S., it's not coming anytime soon, perhaps it's not coming at all?
Well, I think it's a reckoning that the free trade world that we've dealt with for many decades, Catherine, is now not only under stress, but there's a real rupture that happened. And that the U.S. is now taking the decision that they will impose tariffs on many countries. We have the best deal on earth because 85% of all our products being sent to the U.S. are tariff-free. We will continue to work on sectoral deals, definitely steel, aluminum, auto, lumber. But meanwhile, there is so much unpredictability. And businesses are so much affected by this, and of course it affects their own workers, that we need to do more. And we need to not only always react to what's going on, but we need to act to make sure that we're working and laying down the foundation for the long run for our economy. And so that's why you saw such a suite of different initiatives that we launched today.
Well, so let's dig in on one of those. Part of your plan is to allow long-tenured workers to access employment insurance for much longer, up to 65 weeks. So that's an additional 20 weeks. Does this not, in effect, spell out that these tariffs could put many people out of work for over a year?
Well, I think that it's not only what we're seeing is, yes, the impacts of tariffs from the U.S., from China, also, by the way, because we know that the canola sector, seafood, beef sectors have been affected by the Chinese tariffs as well. But it's also the fact that because there's so much unpredictability around the world, there's a freeze in investments in many of these companies. And we need to do more to make sure that, for example, the steel sector that has been developed all around the U.S. auto sector can no longer be taken for granted the access to the U.S. And so these plants are key. We won't let them down. They're important for workers, for Hamilton, for Sault Ste. Marie, all these places around the country that are really built on the fact that they're steel plants. But they're also important to our national security. If one day things really don't go well and there is an international conflict, Canada needs to be able to produce steel.
So you're saying we want to do everything we can to help these people, but I just want to be crystal clear. Baked into this announcement is also the idea that even as you're trying to help these folks, some of them may be out of work for months, if not more than a year.
Well, we will be there to help them. Not only, of course, if things don't go as well, um, the workers will have access to benefits, but not only that, they will be able to reskill.
Mhm.
And we're dealing with trade tensions. We're dealing also with the fact that AI is being more and more used within companies. And we think that AI adoption will increase. And so because of so much technological disruption, because of these trade tensions, we're thinking ahead. We're just not only reacting, we're seizing the moment. And we know there are lots of things, Catherine, we can't control. And Canadians get that, but we will control what we can control. And that's why we're coming up, thinking ahead, and coming up with help for workers, making sure that we are investing in our strategic industries, having a Buy Canadian policy to support our people and our workers at home, and also making sure that we are helping, yes, big companies, but also the small and medium-sized companies that are at the backbone of our economy.
Let's dig in on Buy Canadian. This is a time where we've seen a lot of patriotism. A lot of Canadians might cheer this idea of buying more Canadian steel or aluminum, for example. But this country has spent the past couple of decades ensuring more free trade. Are you sure that this policy isn't going to run into trouble with, say, the Europeans if we start choosing our own suppliers first?
So, lots of countries, including the European Union, is really looking at much more economic protectionism. That's just a reality. And what we're doing is two things. While we're working on a new Buy Canadian policy supporting our people at home, we will also work with Europe, with certain countries in Asia, around the world that believe in free trade. As we speak, the world is being reshaped into economic blocks, and we have to be closer to Europe. We have to be closer to certain Asian countries, Japan, Korea, for example,
Are
to
we
make
not in a
sure that,
block with the U.S. anymore, then, Minister?
well, there are clearly tariffs that have been hurting our industries, and we are over dependent, over reliant on the US. That's just a reality. Too much of our trade, more than 70%, Catherine, of our trade go to the US. So we need to pivot. We need to make sure that we work with Germany, with France, with other countries,
And get out of this
um,
block is really what you're saying.
and working with them on the creation of a bloc which is based on nations that believe in free trade amongst each other. And of course, we'll continue to do business with the US. Of course, we'll do business with the rest of the world. But that reality may be that in certain contexts, there may be tariffs, which we don't agree with.
Yeah.
We don't, it's not, it's, this is not a justification for tariffs. I profoundly disagree with the decisions coming out of the White House. But my job and the government's job and the prime minister's job is to do what's the best interests of Canadians right now, to protect the jobs and to build the Canadian industries in the long run.
Let's talk about electric vehicles because that was also part of this announcement. You are pausing the EV mandate. Transportation accounts for about a quarter of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions based on the latest numbers. Why not more incentives to make these vehicles more affordable instead of pausing this mandate?
So, a couple of things. Right now, our auto sector is really under real threat because of 25% tariffs. That's just a reality. Many jobs are at stake. It's not because of the EV tariffs. It is because of the it's not because of the EV mandates. It's really because of the tariffs. Now we're being pragmatic. We believe in EV mandates. We believe also in EV subsidies. We need to make sure that we have an overall package in the budget. And so that's why we're taking 60 days, which is only 2 months, to be able to look at what is possible. Can we support much more EVs made in Canada? Can we work with the sector, Honda, Toyota, Ford, etc., to make sure that they can produce more EVs in Canada? Can we bring in EVs from the rest of the world that are cheaper, more affordable?
Like
So this
China?
is what we're. Well, we have a policy right now of 100% tariffs on EVs coming from China, but there are many other EVs from, for example, Europe, South Korea, or Japan that are available. So that's what we're looking at.
Okay. Before I let you go, there was
Yeah.
some strong reaction to the fact that you invited one of the key people behind Project 2025 to your cabinet retreat. People will know this is a sort of manifesto to usher in a new ultra-conservative U.S. administration. Now, that man, Kevin Roberts, did cancel. He cited scheduling. But this is a group that holds positions like this one. Quote, married men and women are the ideal natural family structure because all children have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. Tell me about the decision to say we as a government can learn from this person rather than standing up against the positions that he's advocating for.
Listen, you won't have me telling you that I believe in Project 2025 and I agree with it. Every single piece of my heart and mind is against it. But what I can tell you, though, is that it's important that we understand what's going on in the U.S. And maybe because
But what can he tell you that Donald Trump isn't already saying?
well, because it's part of diplomacy and being the former top diplomat of the country, it's important to understand who you're dealing with and what are the different factors that are being discussed, within the White House or across the U.S. We hear different points of views. We have to be ready. Meanwhile, we will continue to stand for our own charter rights and freedom, and we will continue to stand as a strong government that will continue to build Canada as, I think, the best country in the world.
Okay, we are going to have to leave the conversation there. Mélanie Joly, thank you for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Industry Minister Mélanie Joly.
They broke our immigration system by allowing too many, too fast, too easily to come into the country.
That is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on Thursday, signaling he intends to put the conversation about the government's immigration policies back on the front burner. Immigration was a top issue in the dying months of the Trudeau government, skyrocketing new arrivals being blamed for the housing crisis and strains on the social safety net. So the federal government dramatically scaled back the number of people who could come to Canada, both permanent and temporary. But now, immigration is back in the political conversation. This week, Poilievre made the case for major change, linking the number of temporary foreign workers filling jobs in Canada to the high rate of youth unemployment.
Conservatives are calling on the Carney government to permanently scrap the temporary foreign worker program and to stop issuing visas for any new temporary foreign workers coming into the country. Under this proposal, existing permits would be wound down until the program is entirely eliminated. Canadian jobs will go to Canadian workers first.
Poilievre did say the government should keep a separate standalone program for hard-to-fill agricultural jobs. The federal Conservative leader has found a politically unlikely ally, BC's David Eby. The NDP premier has often been attacked by Poilievre for his policies, but it seems there's some agreement on this issue.
The temporary foreign worker program is not working. It should be cancelled or significantly reformed. Here in British Columbia, we see unacceptably high level of unemployment among young people, which has been linked both to the international student visa program as well as the temporary foreign worker program. We can't have an immigration system that fills up our homeless shelters and our food banks. We can't have an immigration system that outpaces our ability to build schools and housing. And we can't have an immigration program that results in high youth unemployment.
But some businesses say they need temporary foreign workers, that there aren't Canadians willing to fill these jobs. Kelly Higginson is the president and CEO of Restaurants Canada, a lobby group for restaurant owners.
So we employ 1.2 million people, and of that 1.2 million people, 3% of it are connected to the temporary foreign worker program, but they are a critical part of it, especially in these rural, remote, and non-large urban centers where we have, an economically diverse community, but we've got an aging population. there just isn't simply the workforce to tap in these communities.
You're really emphasizing communities where there aren't necessarily big youth populations, but some of these temporary foreign workers are brought in to work in cities. Why is that okay when we see a level of youth unemployment right now at 14.6%?
Where we are seeing the majority of those temporary foreign workers that are working the positions in the urban centers, we're talking about businesses that are open 24 hours. We're talking about operations that have shifts that start at 4 a.m. for baking. We're talking about the comfort stations that are 20. Thank goodness for all of us that hit the road this summer. Thank goodness I could pull up and get a coffee at 4 o'clock in the morning when I was on the road to the East Coast. But really what we're seeing in the urban centers is a lot of the positions that they're filling are in those 24 hours or more challenging shifts that we don't necessarily see the youth putting their hands up for.
Conservative immigration critic Michelle Rumpel-Garner told Power and Politics this week she just doesn't buy that kind of argument.
I hear these groups say, well, Canadians don't want to fill those jobs. They don't want to move to these communities. But there's this crutch standing in the way, right? There's this program that allows this essentially endless supply of temporary foreign labor. And instead of focusing on labor mobility strategies, on skills training, on ensuring that companies are paying market wages, we've had this program as the stopgap. And we are in an unprecedented youth jobs crisis right now. Like, it is crazy. So, I think now is the time for boldness. This program has been rife with abuse, not just for wage suppressing for Canadians, but also for the workers who have come to Canada on it. We're not blaming them. The Liberals have enabled this, and it's time for the program to go.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says the program does have a role to play. He notes the number of temporary foreign workers in Canada is low and going down.
They are less than 1% of the labor force. We're looking to adjust those levels and the composition of those workers. And one of the things that this government put in place was restrictions to reduce the flow of low-wage foreign workers, so those who are taking the lower-wage jobs in this country. And that flow is down 70% this year.
The temporary foreign worker program is just one piece of a complicated immigration puzzle. Cuts to the number of international students are having a big impact across the country.
Cape Breton University has cut programs and will eliminate a number of positions over the next year in the face.
Among them is Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which says it's letting staff go because of significant declines to its international enrollment levels.
Quebec universities are dealing with a drop in admission requests from international students.
New data shows Ontario colleges have cut thousands of jobs and canceled or suspended hundreds of programs over the past year.
International students typically pay much higher levels of tuition, and for some colleges and universities, they became a major source of revenue. Now, with less income, some schools are cutting back on classes and programs, and there's labor tension with staff over job security and pay. Gabriel Miller is the president and CEO of the advocacy group Universities Canada.
If Canada is pushing away the talent it needs to create new businesses, give us entrepreneurs, doctors. It's talent that drives a competitive 21st century economy. And in the rush to bring our numbers down, we've pushed too many of the people we want away.
Who do you hold accountable here? Is this about the decision the federal government made to try to deal with immigration numbers that writ large really had boomed in many ways? Or is this a conversation with the provinces about the level of education funding?
I think there's accountability for both federal and provincial governments, because I think they've made the same mistake, which is they haven't cared enough about the opportunity that university creates for young Canadians. And so in Ottawa, this debate is no longer about numbers. The numbers issue is settled. Canada decided it was going to bring down the number of people coming in, and it has. Boy, has it brought down the number. The problem is the government didn't care enough about keeping the people we wanted. And that reflects an undervaluing of talent, which is a real economic liability of Canada. For provinces, they have primary responsibility to fund education and create those opportunities. And they've been shirking it in many cases, and also putting real restrictions on the ability of colleges and universities to generate their own revenues. So both levels of government need to get on the same page that talent is going to drive our economy, and there's no better talent pipeline than strong universities. It's vitally important that Canada not keep fighting the problems of 23 or 2024. We've got to fight the problems of 2025 and 2026 and 2027. And our problem now is this country is up against the ropes economically because of Donald Trump's tariffs. And we're going to need every strategic advantage we can find to drive our economy. And the most important strategic advantage we can get is talent, our own and the best and brightest we can convince to come here.
So, how much are immigration policies affecting the job market and the state of Canadian universities and colleges? Mark Holthe is an immigration lawyer and the host of the Canadian Immigration Podcast. He spent 2 decades working in immigration. Mark, welcome to the House.
Thanks, Catherine. Happy to be here.
We just heard about the tension around these issues of temporary foreign workers and international students. Big picture, what would you say is the state of immigration in Canada right now?
Well, I've been at this for a little over 20 years now, and I think if I was to kind of define it, it would be at an all-time low. And it's not that the programs are not successful and that, they're oversubscribed, which obviously means that they're to some extent doing what they're supposed to do for bringing people in. But the problem right now is that I think our overall reputation globally has really taken a hit. For years, one of the reasons I loved immigration so much was because Canada was not the talk of the town, but the talk of the world. And our international student program was heralded as a global leader. Our immigration program, especially when Express Entry launched, was so well respected. And I think popularity sometimes is its own downfall. And so as those programs expanded, then challenges exist with popularity. And, people can look back with hindsight and say, well, our government should have made different decisions, or they shouldn't have done this or shouldn't have done that. But the reality is it was a product of its own success.
Well, let me ask you, the target for permanent residents this year is 395,000. That is about the number of permanent residents that Canada brought in 2021. And there were 401,000 permanent residents that year. It sounds to me, when we look at that number, like things are getting back to normal. But you seem to be suggesting that things are much worse. You're talking about an all-time low. Help me understand.
Yeah, well, I think as much as anything, it factors into the temporary residents that are in Canada. And then as we saw with our last election, immigration kind of slid to the back door. And the reason it really wasn't much of an issue was because I think the Conservatives probably felt the Liberals had done their dirty work for them in terms of trying to clean up whatever they perceived as was the challenges with immigration. And so what we've seen is, from an immigration standpoint, the total overall numbers have kind of leveled or been pulled back from some of the more ambitious targets that the Liberals had set for themselves. There was a lot of backlash, at least the perception was, from the general public on the pressures that existed within, the whole nature of our country, the social networks, is there doctors enough around, or their housing, all of these social pressures were starting to come to a head. And then they were looking, well, why is this? And so then the target went on the temporary residents. Well, we've simply brought in too many. And that ended up being a huge, huge issue for the Liberal government during the election, and they knew that it was going to be this way. So if someone would have told me back in the beginning of 2024 that the Liberal government would have made the decisions they made to curtail things so abruptly as they did in the fall of last year, I would have been shocked. But their immigration policies took basically a 180 shift, and now we face the situation of them trying to get 1 million or plus people out of the country in the next number of years. So when I say it's kind of the dark days of immigration, it's really all of these individuals who, through no fault of their own, are here wanting to stay. And yes, the levels have been pulled back a little bit, but we just have so many that they've far outstripped the availability for them to stay. And unlike maybe the U.S., for example, if someone was to go study there, they kind of knew going in that there wouldn't be a real easy transition from international student status to be able to stay in the U.S. With Canada, on the other hand, many of these people saw a very clear pathway to a Canadian dream. And after they got here, spent thousands of dollars on their studies, then transitioned and worked in sometimes jobs less desirable, all with a belief that they'd be able to stay. Now we're being told, sorry, we just don't have room for you. So I think that's probably where I'm getting at, because these are the people I deal with every day.
Well, let's dig down into a few examples of some of these people who are here temporarily and the discussion and the scrutiny that's happening right now. The Conservatives have said the temporary foreign worker program is taking jobs away from Canadian youth, and young people aren't applying for these jobs because businesses just aren't doing a good enough job offering a good enough wage. What do you make of that assessment?
The issue is not the temporary foreign worker program. I think we're sitting at, I think the target was around 80,000. I think we've hit about 100, and that's fine. Those numbers are fairly high. But the reality is it's not the temporary foreign worker program where there are checks and balances in place to ensure wages are kept at a prevailing rate, right? So right off the bat, for an employer to get someone on a labor market impact assessment, they have to show there's no Canadian available and that they're paying the prevailing wage rate, which is often a couple dollars more than the median wage and what you'd be typically paying a Canadian anyway. So it's designed not to put downward pressure on wages. Now, in terms of the availability of jobs for young people, I don't think anyone could deny that. And the issue isn't the temporary foreign worker program. The issue is the open work permits. All of these international students who have open work permits, up to 3 years after they graduate and who are entering the labor market. And often employers will, rightly or wrongly, the wages that we pay to workers are some of the highest costs in running a business. So if you can have someone who says, yes, I will work as the manager of your restaurant and I will work for minimum wage, well, then they will pay minimum wage. There's no check and balance on it. And when you have, I don't have the exact numbers, Catherine, but we probably have over 1 million international students in the system who are then transitioning, at any given time, transitioning to open work permits. They are then filling all of these roles that traditionally we never had these numbers of international students. And so if you go back to 10 years ago, what's old is new again. And I remember then Minister Jason Kenney was cracking down and overhauling the temporary foreign worker program because why? Our young people were not getting jobs. And so it's so amazing to me that we're right back to where we were over 10 years ago.
The federal government did, as we heard, reduce dramatically the number of people who could apply for international study permits. So to what extent do you believe that if you're saying that the problem is the jobs that these international students are getting when they get here, to what extent are we in the midst of seeing that issue resolved based on your analysis?
Yeah, and it's going to take a while. Like it really will. So individuals that are going through the school system and then transitioning to open work permits, there are so many that are here right now. And when you look at the steps that the federal government has taken just in this past year to limit the availability of extensions on those work permits, it's going to have an impact on people being able to stay, and they're going to have to make some difficult choices. And obviously, one we encourage is that if you don't have status, that you return home, which is heartbreaking. But the international students that are coming through, the new ones, for sure, they have reduced it. So clearly, that is going to have an impact. It will. We're not going to see change anytime soon. This is not something that's going to happen overnight.
Okay, Mark, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Take care.
Immigration lawyer Mark Holthe. Still to come on the House podcast, Canada's public health agency is cutting jobs as Florida is cutting vaccine mandates for school kids. We'll talk public health and where governments should draw the line right after this break. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode, and tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. We continue to see pushback against vaccines following the global pandemic. In Florida, it's reaching a new level. They intend to be the first state to end the requirement that school children be vaccinated. Meanwhile, here in Canada, cuts have hit the Federal Public Health Agency. The organization helped coordinate and get information out during the pandemic. How should we look at this moment in public health? What's cause for concern versus natural course correction? André Picard is a health reporter and columnist with the Globe and Mail. André, welcome back to the House.
Hi.
The Public Health Agency of Canada says it's cutting roughly 10% of its employees in what it is calling post-pandemic recalibration. The agency did grow rapidly during the pandemic. How much do you think this matters, these cuts, to the agency's ability to do its work?
I think it really depends where the cuts happen. So understandably, there was a huge increase in staffing during the pandemic. I think PHAC proved its worth during the pandemic. It did a lot of good, and now there's less to do. So it's understandable there's some cuts, but it depends where the cuts happen and how they happen.
Is there a particular area where you would say it should be untouchable to some extent?
Well, I think we have to be worried to not make the classic mistake of doing the pandemic preparation stuff, just abandoning them at that because the pandemic's over. There's really, in public health, there's this predictable cycle of panic and neglect when we have a crisis. So I think the crisis part of PHAC has to remain intact. That's really essential. Otherwise, we get the problems that we had with SARS-1 and SARS-2.
Well, and we do expect, in all likelihood, there are more cuts coming because the government is in the midst of this broader cost-cutting exercise. We've seen no indication thus far that the Public Health Agency of Canada would be spared from that, although I suppose that remains to be seen. What advice would you give to politicians about deciding where the line should be in terms of hitting that right mark when we aren't in a crisis?
Yeah, I think the proper line with public health is making sure the stuff that can be most impactful, promoting vaccines, being ready for another pandemic whenever it could happen. The preparation part, the emergency preparedness, I know we have a separate little ministry for that now, but the emergency preparedness part of public health is the one that should be really untouchable. And also in this time, I think the vaccine promotion because of what's going on just south of the border. But there's probably a lot of fat in PHAC, I'm guessing, and there's a lack of transparency. So I think they have to be a lot more clear about what they're doing, what's important, and they have to make the case.
You talk about what's going on south of the border. Let's zoom in here on Florida for a minute. The plan to get rid of vaccine mandates in schools. There are a lot of connections between Canada and Florida. Last year, more than 3 million Canadians visited the state. How significant do you think the repercussions could be here if Florida does indeed go ahead with these plans?
Well, you know, what Florida is doing is a tragedy to not protect children from preventable infectious diseases, under the guise of freedom. Freedom for kids to be sick, that's not freedom to me. So I think that emotionally, practically, politically, this is disastrous. And I'm afraid it's going to spread to other states. There's going to be some trickling up to Canada. We're already seeing Alberta is now going to charge people for COVID vaccines. This really undermines our tradition of giving people free protection from infectious disease because it pays off. So there's a real economic argument to be made there, but it's being undermined by politics and dogma.
And I think it's important for us to acknowledge the state of things in Canada right now. I mean, we are still dealing with measles. The newest numbers from Health Canada suggest that there are 575 recent measles cases in this country. How do you think public health writ large should be responding to this moment, this push-pull, both over vaccines and the fact that we are seeing the spread of disease?
I think public health's job is to remind us just how important it is for children to be vaccinated. Measles, the ongoing outbreaks are very problematic. Measles is really the canary in the coal mine. It's the one that spreads most easily. If we stop vaccination, MMR vaccine rates continue to drop, then we're going to see a whole bunch of other stuff, rubella, chicken pox, you name it. It's going to be the days of old. And it wasn't the good old days. I was brought up in those times when we had all these infectious diseases. A lot of sickness and actually a lot of death of children, and nothing is more tragic.
How hard do you think it's going to be to turn the tide on the skepticism that we are seeing in so many places in North America around vaccines and public health officials?
It's going to be very difficult because we have people in positions of power repeating lies constantly. We see RFK Jr. saying things like the COVID vaccine is the most dangerous vaccine in history. He's saying that vaccines haven't been tested properly in children. None of that is true. These are the most impactful medical products in the history of humanity and among the safest. So we really need a public health infrastructure that really promotes science and pushes back. PHAC is very, very quiet on vaccines. They kind of take a sit back, not be proactive approach to vaccination, and that's not good enough anymore in a world where this has become a fight for people's beliefs and for their actions.
I hear you saying in essence, it's time to push a little bit harder. I have been wondering, though, as we see these stories come out, particularly the story out of Florida, whether there is a bit of self-reflection required from people in public health and people who spread that message over the course of the pandemic about this pushback we're seeing being a response to the way the conversation went during the pandemic. If perhaps the pushing was too hard and that's what's led to the moment we find ourselves in now. What is your reflection about what people in public health should be asking themselves at this moment?
No, personally, I don't think the push was too hard. I think in some areas we went too far, but it was well-meaning, it was well-intentioned, and I think there's a lot of rewriting of history. We have people saying that, there was terrible breaches of rights, that we were locked down for months on end. Again, none of that is true. We had very small closures that I think were mostly appropriate. Hindsight's always 20/20. I think if we did a pandemic again, we'd do it differently. But this whole notion that we have to have the freedom to individually decide that our actions have no impact on anyone else, that's selfishness. That's all that is. Getting every child in a school vaccinated is important to the community health, not only the health of your own child. So I don't buy this argument that we should have the freedom to decide if our kids get a vaccine or not.
Thank you very much for this.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
The Globe and Mail's André Picard. Do you know what you would do if there was a worst-case scenario emergency? Some of Canada's allies have been preparing their populations for decades. Last week on the show, we aired a special documentary about what the two newest NATO members, Finland and Sweden, are doing to be ready for war or natural disasters. If you missed that episode, catch it in your podcast feed. Today, we want to talk about whether Canadians should be prepared to do more to protect this country. My next two guests think so. Alex Wilner is an associate professor at Carleton University. He's the director of the Infrastructure Protection Program there. And Aoife Cohen is the president of Civil Protection Youth Canada. Welcome to the House to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, I want to start with you. Paint me a little bit of a picture here. Like last week on the show, we heard about bomb shelters and people knowing how to use bomb shelters in some of these NATO allies. But we also heard about things like required military service. When you picture something that would best suit Canada's needs for a variety of worst-case scenarios, what do you see as sort of the contours of that being?
So I take an all-hazards approach, which means the way that we prepare should be able to help us in all contingencies, in various scenarios. Sometimes those scenarios will have to deal with the sharp end of the stick, armed aggression, violence, terrorism, cyber attacks. But the other side of this is being able to respond as a society, as families, as communities, to other types of emergencies. And so what does it look like? I think top down, we need leadership, we need opportunities for training, we need mechanisms to give from Canadians, from corporations, from civil society actors, from educators, right? Some of this will land with national defense. We're having a huge conversation in this country about levels of funding, levels of recruitment, kinds of armaments we want, we need, and so forth. That is one element of this, but I think it's a lot more than just that.
Okay. Aoife, you are very passionate about this, and you, in fact, do work right now, this Civil Protection Youth Canada, teaching young people some of these skills. What is it you're teaching them?
Well, all the things that Alex just said basically play a role in our feeling of resilience or confidence in what do we do when things go wrong. And so the program really focuses on creating this feeling of being in control even though things go wrong. And so what we're teaching in our program is basically the skill sets to think outside the box. What can you do if this doesn't work? What can you do instead? And also those skills that you would need to deal with the situation. So let's say something is destroyed. Can I fix it? If I can't fix it, can I provide something as an alternative?
Something like what? Help me picture this.
Well, think of infrastructure, right? So in our current response system, we have big gaps. So what we're trying to show with our program is basically what other allies are doing. For example, Germany, that's where we're basing our program on. If a bridge is destroyed, who in our current system is providing an emergency bridge so that we can get across or get help across or reach people? But then it goes all the way further to the aspect of civil defense, where we have to think of critical infrastructure being impacted. Who in our system right now, in our response system, provides emergency communication setup? Who provides emergency power supply? Who can purify water and supply water, drinking water? So what we are missing is the alternative to what we're used to. And so it starts with the very basics, just teaching kids how to change a tire or how to secure the scene of an accident, so that you're not paralyzed with fear when something goes wrong, but there is something that you can do to make the situation better and safer, and to do it all while being safe.
Are the kids afraid as you're explaining some of this to them? I mean, this conversation may well frighten some people, right? We're talking about some pretty extreme scenarios.
Well, I think we don't have to beat around the bush with this, because we know what the problems in our society are, right? There's a huge level of climate anxiety in youth. There's also this feeling of helplessness and a loss of purpose, and we don't often give youth a role in society. And then at the same time, we're seeing that our systems are in danger. Just when you think of democracy, it only works when people engage. At what point are we inviting people to engage other than on the political level? So giving them a role in their community where they are seen as a trusted partner, and I want to make clear that we're not sending youth in disaster zones. It's about training them and teaching them so that they know what to anticipate, to be ready and to be prepared, which lessens the scare when you think of it, right?
Alex, I do think, though, some people will still find this conversation somewhat alarmist. And I wonder how you address, certainly there are European allies who are having more thoughtful conversations about this. The people in those countries, though, may feel geographically closer to some of these big threats. Yes, of course, in Canada, when it comes to the Arctic, we are close to Russia, but I think the visceral feeling of the threat in Finland with such a long shared border is different than how Canadians might feel about the possibility of a threat like that. What would you say to people who say, what you're talking about sounds a bit scary and perhaps a bit excessive?
Russia is certainly part of this conversation, but it's one part of the conversation. I think, taking a very high-level perspective here, there is an ongoing demise of democratic norms, of institutions and laws that govern international affairs, from migration to the assistance and provision of aid and so forth. Liberal democracies like Canada thrive under the rules-based order. So Russia is, again, part of the issue, and I understood your episode last week was detailed about that. But to my mind, there are other large geopolitical shifts ongoing that will last well beyond years to perhaps decades, that are slowly requiring countries like Canada to stand up more firmly. And so it's relatively new for us. We've been here before, World War II or during the height of the Cold War. But I would say that it's challenges. It's not only military risks or threats. It's all hazards challenges.
Such as?
Our current relationship with the United States is in a very difficult and dire it's terrible, I mean, frankly. And so I would say that it's hard to know precisely where that relationship is going, but our entire many of our institutions are tied to this notion that America is a proper and good ally to us. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to arm against America. What I'm suggesting is that the way things were are no longer certain. And so preparing ourselves today is about having the best response tomorrow. And I would just add to Effa's piece, right? Being prepared provides psychological resilience. Anecdotally, right? I recertified my first aid It was provided free of charge, provided to all Canadians at a local synagogue in Ottawa, provided by 3 paramedics for free. And when I left that room, I felt better about myself. I felt better to respond in case of need. That goes a long way.
If Canadians are more viscerally aware of the threats posed by, be it climate change, be it geopolitical tension, who would you see taking the next step to get something organized for Canadian society?
I think we're seeing a lot of effort in that field. You know, we have identified a lot of gaps in the system. So I think both Public Safety Canada, obviously, and also D&D are working on filling those gaps, finding solutions. And what I'm just seeing in those discussions is that we continue to be reactive. We're constantly trying to do better what we have not been doing well. But we are so in constant response. And I also wanted to say that to being alarmist. I mean, we don't have to be alarmist. People are experiencing this on a daily basis. You know, just this wildfire season, again, is such an example of how many people are experiencing this.
Dealing with situations like that, certainly on the front lines, requires a degree of professionalization. If we are talking about the worst case scenario of some sort of invading force. And I appreciate the whole point here is it could be much broader than that. But again, we think about the military. Where is the line between what average Canadians can do and what somebody needs expertise to do safely?
I think, again, this is why I like to point to Germany's system, because that is such a good example. So Germany has a federal agency for technical relief. It's called Technisches Hilfswerk, THW. That is a government agency for civil defense. But at the same time, it's also for civil protection to support the provinces. And the unique thing about it is that it is 98% citizen-based. So it's a federal agency, but it's based on local citizens. And what it does is it trains people to be of value in hazardous situations, to either bring in their professional skills or to be trained to professional level to become an expert, even though they're just volunteering. With a system like Germany's, and especially adapted to Canadian realities, we can provide local awareness and preparedness so we can shift our system from being reactive to being proactive. Because all of a sudden we have people all over the country who have no other job than to think about what can possibly go wrong in our community and what do we do if that happens and what do we need to do to be ready for it. And then they get trained in those skill sets and we create the coordination and cooperation that we need to work together.
Alex, I think back to the pandemic, and I remember when Patty Hajdu was health minister, and she said, well, people should probably have a supply of food for about 72 hours in their house in case of emergency. She was pilloried in some of the public sphere at the time. People said, that is so alarmist. You're frightening people. This is unnecessary. Now, obviously, when the pandemic took hold, we saw that the situation was pretty dramatic. Perhaps many people would have liked to have had that supply of food. But again, this question of the political reality of politicians giving voice to what is ultimately a very fearful scenario for people. Like, what would you say to our leaders about how to talk to Canadians about this?
I mean, our current leadership, I find, it is, in fact, talking quite clearly about our relationship with Americans, about the kinds of challenges we face in Europe and potentially in the Taiwan Straits, right? I mean, the world is literally at war with itself, right? And so I think there is an emerging consideration that Canada must do more. That's the basic. And I don't think there's a political cost to it. I think it's the reality of where we are at. And in fact, what government will lose power for having prepared for the worst? This is it. Prepare today to avoid the worst tomorrow.
I just liked how you brought in the pandemic, because I think that's a perfect example what happens when we do not bring in the civilian population into the response system. Eventually, there is a lack of trust that the measures you need to take are actually the right thing. And we saw that too with the derecho, for example, when it took weeks in Ottawa for the power to come back. What happens? The population is dissatisfied. People start to get angry and they lose trust in their government. And that's why it's very important that we form a partnership and bring people in so that we can all work together for the right goal.
Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aoife Cohen is the founder of Civil Protection Youth Canada. Alex Wilner is the director of Carleton University's Infrastructure Protection Program. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the House is Kristen Everson, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, Victoria Valito, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Miguel Plant. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.